She was just a quiet, poor girl who spent her afternoons drawing gears in her notebook. During a visit to an engineering center, she solved a problem that millionaires couldn't crack. One of the millionaires recognized her, and everything changed completely. Subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you're watching us. Continuing. Lucy Reynolds was just 11 years old, living with her mother in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Boston. While other children spent their afternoons playing in the streets or glued to their devices, Lucy would sit at her small desk by the window, sketching mechanical designs in a repurposed notebook. She didn't have internet access or a computer, luxuries her single mother, Sarah, couldn't afford on her nurse's salary. What Lucy did have were her grandfather's old engineering textbooks, collected from his days working at MIT before his passing. 3 years ago, the apartment was small but clean, walls adorned with Lucy's intricate drawings of gears, circuits, and mechanical systems that seemed far too advanced for a child her age. Sarah often watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern, wondering where this extraordinary talent would lead her in a world that rarely made space for quiet brilliance. "Lucy, dinner's ready," Sarah called from their tiny kitchen. Lucy looked up from her notebook, where she'd been redesigning a hydraulic system she'd seen in one of her grandfather's books. "Coming, Mum." She carefully closed her notebook, running her hand over the worn cover before joining her mother at the table. "How was school today?" Sarah asked, serving a modest portion of pasta. Lucy shrugged. "Fine. Ms. Winters announced we're going on a field trip next week to the Jenkins Institute." Sarah's eyes widened. "The Jenkins Institute? That's one of the most prestigious technology centers in the country." "I know," Lucy said quietly. "Grandpa mentioned it in his journals. He always wanted to work there." The Jenkins Institute was a beacon of innovation in Cambridge, home to some of the most brilliant minds in engineering and technology. Founded by billionaire tech mogul Richard Jenkins, it specialized in developing renewable energy systems and hybrid engines that were revolutionizing the industry. At school, Lucy was known as the quiet girl who sat in the back. Her teachers saw her as intelligent but reserved, never suspecting the depth of knowledge contained in her young mind. Her classmates generally ignored her, too consumed with their social hierarchies to notice the girl who spent lunch periods scribbling in her notebook. Ms. Reynolds, her science teacher, Mr. Parker, had approached her desk earlier that day. "Are you excited about the trip to the Jenkins Institute?" Lucy had looked up, her eyes momentarily lighting up. "Yes, sir." "Good." He smiled, glancing at her notebook. "You might actually understand what they're talking about, unlike most of your classmates." That was as close as anyone had come to recognizing Lucy's gift. Mr. Parker had occasionally noticed the complexity of her drawings, but even he didn't fully grasp the advanced concepts she was working with. The evening before the field trip, Lucy sat cross-legged on her bed, poring over her grandfather's journals, particularly the entries about energy conversion systems. William Reynolds had been a brilliant engineer whose career was cut short by an economic downturn that left him unemployed in his 50s. He'd spent his final years documenting his ideas, theories, and designs, a legacy that found its way into his granddaughter's hands. "Lucy, it's past 10, Sarah said, appearing in the doorway. "You need to sleep." "Just a few more minutes." "Mum." Lucy's fingers traced a diagram her grandfather had drawn. "I think I understand what he was trying to solve here." Sarah sighed, sitting beside her daughter. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, you know that. But he'd also want you to get some rest." Lucy nodded reluctantly, closing the journal. "Do you think anyone at the Institute will talk to me tomorrow?" Sarah brushed a strand of brown hair from her daughter's face. "Anyone would be lucky to hear what you have to say, sweetheart. Just be yourself." The next morning, Lucy dressed carefully in her best clothes, a simple blue button-up shirt and jeans without holes. She packed her notebook and a few colored pencils, just in case inspiration struck. The bus ride to Cambridge was filled with the excited chatter of her classmates, while Lucy sat alone, gazing out the window, her mind already at the Institute. The Jenkins Institute was a marvel of modern architecture, a complex of glass and steel buildings arranged around a central courtyard. As their class filed through the security checkpoint, Lucy felt a strange sensation, like she was finally stepping into a world she'd only visited in her imagination. Dr. Eleanor Taylor, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, greeted their class. "Welcome to the Jenkins Institute. I'll be your guide today." Her gaze swept over the students, pausing momentarily on Lucy, who stood slightly apart from the group, her notebook clutched to her chest. The tour began with the public exhibition spaces, impressive displays of the Institute's achievements in renewable energy, robotics, and medical technology. Lucy's classmates oohed and ahed at the flashy demonstrations, but Lucy was waiting for something more substantial. Her chance came after lunch when Dr. Taylor led them through a corridor that housed the actual research labs. Through glass walls, Lucy could see engineers and scientists at work, their faces intense with concentration. They passed a room where a heated discussion was taking place, with several people gathered around a large digital display. "What's happening there?" one of Lucy's classmates asked. Dr. Taylor hesitated. "That's the Prometheus project team. They're working on a new hybrid engine system, but they've encountered some challenges." Lucy slowed her pace, falling behind the group as she observed the engineers through the glass. On the screen, she could make out schematics for a modular component, one that looked strikingly similar to designs she'd studied in her grandfather's books. Something about the configuration caught her attention. The engineers were pointing at a specific section, their frustration evident even from a distance. The group moved on, but Lucy remained, her eyes fixed on the diagram. She opened her notebook, quickly sketching what she saw, adding notes in her neat handwriting. There was something wrong with their design, something fundamental that they weren't seeing. "Lucy?" Mr. Parker had noticed her absence. "We're moving on." "Mr. Parker," Lucy said, her voice unusually firm. "I think there's something wrong with their design." The teacher glanced at the engineers, then back at his student. "Lucy, those are some of the brightest minds in the country. They've been working on this project for months. But the modular inverter is reversed," she said simply. "It can't possibly function that way." Mr. Parker looked at her skeptically, but was intrigued enough to mention it to Dr. Taylor, who initially dismissed the idea with a polite smile. However, something in Lucy's earnest expression made her pause. "Why don't you show me what you mean?" Dr. Taylor said, more out of curiosity than conviction. Lucy opened her notebook and pointed to her sketch. "See here, the energy flow is being directed backward through this component. It should be oriented like this." She quickly drew an alternative configuration. "Otherwise, it creates a feedback loop that will cause system failure every time." Dr. Taylor's expression shifted from indulgent to stunned as she examined Lucy's drawing. Without a word, she stepped into the lab, interrupting the ongoing discussion. The engineers looked up in annoyance until Dr. Taylor showed them Lucy's notebook. "Who drew this?" demanded a man with salt and pepper hair and an authoritative presence, Dr. James Mitchell, the project lead. Dr. Taylor gestured to Lucy, who stood nervously in the doorway. "This young lady, she's with the school tour." Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. "Young lady, do you understand what you've drawn here?" Lucy nodded. "It's a hybrid modular system with integrated energy conversion, but your inverter module is backward. It's fighting against the natural energy flow instead of harnessing it." The room fell silent. One of the younger engineers scoffed, but Dr. Mitchell raised his hand, silencing him. "Simulate her configuration," he ordered. Fingers flew across keyboards as they input Lucy's suggested changes. The simulation began to run, and within minutes the system metrics that had been flashing red turned green. The energy flow stabilized, and the efficiency ratings climbed steadily. "That's impossible," whispered one of the engineers. "We've been working on this for weeks." Dr. Mitchell turned to Lucy, his expression a mixture of shock and admiration. "Who are you?" "Lucy Reynolds, sir," she replied softly. "My grandfather was William Reynolds. He used to work on similar systems." Recognition flickered in Dr. Mitchell's eyes. "Will Reynolds? I knew him years ago, brilliant mind." He looked at Lucy with newfound respect. Apparently, it runs in the family. As the simulation continued to show perfect system harmony, the atmosphere in the room transformed. The engineers who had dismissed Lucy moments ago now looked at her with a combination of embarrassment and wonder. Dr. Taylor stood to the side, watching with a growing smile. Lucy, however, remained unchanged, still the quiet girl with the notebook, still the observer. But as she stood among these accomplished professionals who were suddenly hanging on her every word, something shifted inside her. For the first time, she felt her grandfather's presence not just in the pages of his journals, but in her own capacity to see what others couldn't. And in that moment, a door opened, one that would lead her down a path none of them could have predicted, toward a future that would challenge not just the Jenkins Institute, but the very foundations of how the world viewed innovation, education, and the untapped potential of young minds that society too often overlooked. The days following Lucy's breakthrough at the Jenkins Institute passed in a blur. News of the 11-year-old who had solved the Prometheus project's critical flaw spread through the institute like wildfire. Dr. Mitchell had personally called Sarah Reynolds that evening, explaining what had happened and expressing his interest in having Lucy return. "Mrs. Reynolds, your daughter possesses a rare gift," he had said, his voice still tinged with disbelief. "We would like to invite her to visit the Institute again, perhaps on weekends, to observe some of our projects." Sarah had been stunned. "Dr. Mitchell, Lucy is just a child. She should be playing with friends, not working in a research facility." "I understand your concerns," he replied. "But this wouldn't be work. Think of it as an educational opportunity, a chance for her to develop her extraordinary talent in a way that no school could provide." After much discussion, Sarah reluctantly agreed to a trial period. Lucy would visit the institute on Saturday mornings, strictly as an observer, with Sarah accompanying her. That first Saturday, Lucy wore her favorite blue sweater, the one her grandfather had given her for her last birthday before his passing. She carried her notebook, freshly stocked with new colored pencils that Sarah had splurged on to celebrate her daughter's achievement. "Remember," Sarah said, as they walked through the institute's imposing entrance, "you're here to learn, not to solve their problems. You're 11 years old, Lucy. Your job is to be a child." Lucy nodded, but her eyes were already darting around the facility, absorbing every detail. Dr. Mitchell greeted them personally, leading them to a conference room where several engineers from the Prometheus project were gathered. "Everyone, this is Lucy Reynolds," Dr. Mitchell announced. "And her mother, Sarah. Lucy, these are some of our senior engineers. They've been eager to meet you." The engineers nodded politely, though Lucy noticed varying degrees of skepticism in their expressions. One woman, however, Dr. Natalie Chen, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, studied Lucy with genuine interest. "So you're the prodigy who spotted our embarrassing oversight," Dr. Chen said, her tone direct but not unkind. "I'd like to hear how you figured it out." Lucy glanced at her mother, who gave an encouraging nod. "It was the energy flow pattern," Lucy explained, opening her notebook to a fresh page and sketching rapidly. "You were trying to force the current against its natural path, but energy always seeks the path of least resistance, like water flowing downhill." Dr. Chen leaned forward, watching as Lucy's small hands created a detailed diagram. "And you learned this from your grandfather's books?" "Some of it," Lucy admitted. "But mostly I just see it, like how things want to move." Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Dr. Mitchell. "Intuitive understanding of energy dynamics," she murmured. "At 11. The morning continued with Lucy observing a team meeting where engineers discussed the next phase of the Prometheus project. Sarah sat beside her daughter, noting how Lucy's eyes never wandered, how she absorbed every word despite the complex terminology. During a break, a young engineer named Alex Wilson approached Lucy. Unlike some of his colleagues, his smile was genuine, without a trace of condescension. "That was impressive work with the inverter module," he said, crouching to meet her eye level. "I spent 3 years at MIT studying energy systems, and I completely missed what you saw in minutes." Lucy smiled shyly. "Sometimes it's easier to see things when you're not too close to them." Alex laughed. Out of the mouths of babes. You might be right about that. He glanced at her notebook. Mind if I see what else you've been working on? Lucy hesitated, then turned to a page where she'd been redesigning a cooling system for electronic components. Alex's eyes widened as he studied her drawings. This is innovative, he said slowly. You've created a passive cooling solution that could reduce energy consumption by at least 30%. It's just an idea, Lucy said, suddenly self-conscious. Ideas like this change the world, Alex replied seriously. Over the following weeks, Lucy's Saturday visits became a fixture in the Reynolds household routine. Sarah began to relax as she saw how respectfully her daughter was treated, and how much joy Lucy found in these mornings, surrounded by people who spoke her language of circuits and energy flows. But not everyone at the Jenkins Institute welcomed the young prodigy. Thomas Barrett, a senior engineer with 20 years of experience and numerous patents to his name, watched Lucy's growing influence with thinly veiled resentment. He had been passed over for leadership of the Prometheus project in favor of Dr. Mitchell, and now this child was being treated like some kind of messiah. We're scientists, not babysitters, Barrett muttered during one meeting, loud enough for others to hear. This place is turning into a circus. Dr. Mitchell had silenced him with a sharp look, but the damage was done. Lucy, sitting quietly in the corner, had heard every word. She said nothing, but that evening Sarah found her daughter unusually subdued. Did something happen today? Sarah asked, sitting on the edge of Lucy's bed. Lucy shrugged, tracing patterns on her bedspread. Some people don't think I should be there. Sarah sighed, pulling her daughter into a hug. There will always be people who feel threatened by what they don't understand or by those who are different. Your grandfather faced the same thing. He did? Oh, yes. He was always seeing solutions that others missed. It made some people uncomfortable. Sarah smoothed Lucy's hair. But the right people recognized his gifts, just like Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Chen recognize yours. The following Saturday, Lucy arrived at the Institute to find an atmosphere of tension. The Prometheus project was facing a critical deadline, and the pressure was palpable. Dr. Mitchell looked haggard, and even Dr. Chen's usual composure seemed strained. What's happening? Lucy whispered to Alex, who had become something of a friend during her visits. The Archer Foundation is sending representatives next week, Alex explained. They're major funders, and they want to see a working prototype of the Prometheus engine. We're not ready. Lucy nodded, taking her usual seat in the corner of the lab. Throughout the morning, she watched as the team worked feverishly on a simulation that kept failing at the final integration stage. The hybrid engine would run perfectly, for a few minutes, then destabilize catastrophically. Barrett was growing increasingly agitated. The fundamental design is sound, he insisted. It has to be a calibration issue. We've recalibrated 6 times, Dr. Chen countered. Something deeper is wrong. As the debate grew heated, Lucy studied the simulation data scrolling across the screens. Something about the energy spikes looked familiar, a pattern she'd seen in one of her grandfather's unfinished designs. Quietly, she opened her notebook and began to sketch. Hours passed. The team broke for lunch, but Lucy remained immersed in her calculations. Sarah, seeing her daughter's intense focus, brought her a sandwich and juice, which Lucy barely touched. By mid-afternoon, Lucy approached Dr. Mitchell, who was rubbing his temples in frustration. Dr. Mitchell, she said softly, I think I see the problem. He looked up, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and hope. What is it, Lucy? It's not the components, she said, opening her notebook. It's the underlying concept. You're trying to control the energy flow too precisely, but hybrid systems need room to find their own balance, like ecosystems. Barrett, overhearing, scoffed loudly. Now we're taking engineering advice from biological metaphors, from a child. Dr. Mitchell ignored him, studying Lucy's diagrams. Go on, he encouraged. Instead of trying to direct every aspect of the energy conversion, what if you created conditions for it to self-regulate? Lucy suggested. Like this. She showed a design where the system could adapt to varying energy inputs without external controls. Dr. Mitchell's eyes widened. You're talking about a self-optimizing system. That's theoretical, Barrett interrupted. It's never been successfully implemented in a mechanical system this complex. Because everyone approaches it mechanically, Lucy said quietly. But energy isn't just mechanical, it's alive in a way. Dr. Chen had joined them, examining Lucy's drawings. She's describing an organic systems approach. It's unconventional, but she looked at Dr. Mitchell. It could work. This is absurd, Barrett snapped. We have 5 days until the Archer Foundation arrives, and you want to restructure our entire approach based on the scribblings of a child? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Dr. Mitchell, who stood motionless, gaze fixed on Lucy's notebook. Finally, he looked up, his decision evident in his eyes. Alex, he said, start building a simulation based on Lucy's design. Dr. Chen, reconfigure the test parameters. We're going to try this approach. Barrett's face flushed with anger. James, this is professional suicide. Maybe, Dr. Mitchell acknowledged, or maybe it's the breakthrough we've been needing. He turned to Lucy. Would you be willing to help us implement this? It would mean coming in after school for the next few days. Lucy looked at her mother, who hesitated before nodding reluctantly. As long as her schoolwork doesn't suffer, Sarah stipulated. Of course, Dr. Mitchell agreed. The next 5 days were a whirlwind of activity. Lucy arrived at the institute each afternoon, working alongside Alex and Dr. Chen to implement her organic systems approach. Barrett remained skeptical, making his disapproval known at every opportunity, but even he couldn't deny the promising results of the early simulations. By Friday afternoon, the day before the Archer Foundation's visit, a working prototype was ready for final testing. The entire Prometheus team gathered in the main lab, tension thick in the air. Lucy stood between her mother and Alex, her heart racing as Dr. Mitchell initiated the startup sequence. The hybrid engine hummed to life. On the monitors, energy flows stabilized in patterns that matched Lucy's predictions exactly. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 15, far longer than any previous test had lasted. It's holding, Dr. Chen announced, her voice tight with controlled excitement. All parameters within optimal range. After 30 minutes of flawless operation, Dr. Mitchell shut down the system. A moment of stunned silence followed. Then the room erupted in cheers and applause. Team members who had regarded Lucy with skepticism now looked at her with newfound respect. Even Barrett stood speechless, his earlier criticism silenced by the undeniable success before him. Dr. Mitchell approached Lucy, his face alight with triumph and gratitude. Lucy Reynolds, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you've just helped us redefine the future of energy technology. Lucy smiled, but her eyes sought her mother's. Sarah looked both proud and slightly worried, a mother watching her child step into a world far bigger than she had ever imagined. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Mitchell pulled Sarah aside. Mrs. Reynolds, after tomorrow's presentation, we'd like to discuss a more formal arrangement for Lucy's involvement with the Institute. With proper mentorship, her gift could change the world. Sarah watched her daughter across the room, chatting animatedly with Alex about some new idea. She's still a child, Dr. Mitchell, she said softly. I won't let her childhood be sacrificed even for changing the world. I understand, he replied, but some gifts come with responsibilities, to ourselves and to others. Lucy sees things differently. That vision could help solve problems that have stumped the brightest minds of our generation. As they drove home that evening, Lucy stared out the window, her mind still buzzing with equations and possibilities. Mom, she said suddenly, what do you think Grandpa would say about all this? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think he'd be proud of what you've accomplished, but he'd also remind you that the greatest minds don't just solve problems. They choose the right problems to solve. Lucy nodded, turning back to the window. In the reflection of the glass, her young face appeared superimposed over the passing. City lights, a child on the threshold of something extraordinary, for better or worse. The Archer Foundation's visit to the Jenkins Institute marked a turning point in Lucy's young life. Representatives from the prestigious organization, including its founder, technology billionaire Marcus Archer himself, watched in amazement as the Prometheus prototype performed flawlessly. What had begun as a routine funding review turned into something much more significant when Dr. Mitchell explained the revolutionary approach behind the engine's design. "And you're saying an 11-year-old child conceptualized this organic systems approach?" Marcus Archer asked, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Dr. Mitchell with skepticism. "Not just conceptualized it," Dr. Mitchell replied. "She was instrumental in implementing it. In fact, she's here today." He gestured to where Lucy sat quietly, beside her mother, trying to make herself inconspicuous. Marcus Archer studied Lucy with undisguised curiosity. At 62, he had built his fortune on recognizing potential before others saw it. He approached Lucy and Sarah, his imposing presence softened by genuine interest. "Lucy Reynolds," he said, extending his hand. "I've been in this business for 40 years and I've never seen an approach like yours. Where did you learn to think this way?" Lucy shook his hand, her small palm disappearing in his. "I didn't learn it exactly, sir. I just see how energy wants to move." "Natural systems thinking," Archer mused, "applied to mechanical engineering." He turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Reynolds, your daughter has an extraordinary gift. Has she been tested for—" "She's in the gifted program at school," Sarah interrupted, protective instincts flaring. "But we prefer not to define her by test scores." Archer nodded, respecting her boundary. "Of course, still, gifts like hers come along maybe once in a generation. I'd like to discuss how the Archer Foundation might support her development." The meeting that followed was overwhelming. Marcus Archer proposed not only continued funding for the Prometheus project, but also a special grant for Lucy, a scholarship that would cover her education through college, with access to mentors, resources, and facilities normally reserved for graduate researchers. "This is too much," Sarah protested, feeling out of her depth. "Lucy needs a normal childhood. School friends, time to just be a kid." "Mrs. Reynolds," Archer said gently, "exceptional minds rarely thrive in conventional environments. I'm not suggesting we turn Lucy into some kind of lab experiment, but, with the right support, she could develop her abilities while still enjoying her childhood." Lucy, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Could other kids be involved too?" Archer looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I'm not the only one who sees things differently," Lucy explained. "There are other kids at my school who have different kinds of seeing, but no one notices them." This simple observation shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. By the end of the meeting, a more nuanced plan had emerged. Lucy would work with the Institute 2 afternoons a week, with the flexibility to adjust based on her needs and school requirements. Additionally, the Archer Foundation would explore the possibility of a weekend program for other children with unique cognitive approaches to problem solving. As spring turned to summer, Lucy's life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings at school, afternoons split between normal kid activities and her work at the Institute, where she had become something of a fixture. The Prometheus project moved from prototype to development phase, with Lucy's organic systems approach at its core. News of her contributions began to spread beyond the Institute. A profile in a scientific journal led to an article in the Boston Globe, which caught the attention of national media. Soon, interview requests began pouring in, along with invitations from prestigious universities and technology companies across the country. "She's 11 years old," Sarah repeated firmly to Dr. Mitchell one afternoon in late June. "I won't have her paraded around like some circus attraction." "I agree completely," Dr. Mitchell assured her. "But we can't keep her entirely sheltered from recognition either. Her work is changing how we approach energy systems." The pressure intensified when Barrett, still smarting from being proven wrong, gave an interview suggesting that Lucy's contributions had been wildly exaggerated and that the Institute was exploiting a child for publicity. Though few took his bitter comments seriously, they added to Sarah's concerns about her daughter's growing public profile. Lucy herself remained remarkably unchanged by the attention. She still preferred her notebook to social media, still struggled with gym class, still had only a handful of friends at school. But there were subtle shifts, a new confidence when she spoke, a willingness to defend her ideas even when adults disagreed. One hot July afternoon, Lucy was working with Alex in a quiet corner of the lab when a commotion erupted in the main research area. Curious, they went to investigate and found the institute in a state of controlled chaos. A major power outage had hit Boston Children's Hospital, and their backup generators were malfunctioning. "The battery systems are overheating," Dr. Chen explained tersely. "They're using a modified version of the high-tower UPS system." "That's the one with the cascading failsafe, right?" Lucy asked, already opening her notebook. Dr. Chen nodded. "Yes, but something's causing it to destabilize. They have emergency power to critical systems, but it won't last long." Without hesitation, Lucy began sketching, her pencil flying across the page. The high-tower system has a fundamental flaw in its heat management. When ambient temperatures rise above 90 degrees, like today, the cooling system becomes part of the problem. She turned her notebook to show a diagram of the failing system, alongside a modified design that would allow for emergency reconfiguration. If they bypass this junction and reroute through the secondary circuit, they could stabilize the system long enough for proper repairs. Dr. Mitchell, who had joined them, studied her solution. This could work, but explaining it over the phone would be nearly impossible. "I'll go," Alex volunteered immediately. "I understand Lucy's redesign, and I've worked with hospital systems before." Dr. Mitchell hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Take whatever equipment you need. And Lucy," he turned to her, "thank you." Within 20 minutes, Alex was en route to the hospital, with Lucy's diagrams and a toolkit. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense waiting, with periodic updates from the field. Finally, at just past 6 o'clock, Alex called with news. The system was stabilized. The hospital staff had implemented Lucy's bypass solution, and power was fully restored to all departments. When the full story emerged, the impact of Lucy's quick thinking became clear. The power failure had affected incubators in the neonatal intensive care unit and life support systems throughout the hospital. Her solution had potentially saved dozens of lives. This incident, more than any academic recognition, transformed how Lucy was perceived, not just at the institute, but throughout Boston's scientific community. She wasn't merely a curiosity anymore, a child prodigy with interesting theories. She was someone whose mind could make a tangible difference in the world. The hospital incident also marked a turning point in Barrett's attitude. When he learned what had happened, his perpetual scowl softened slightly. "Not bad," he admitted grudgingly when he next saw Lucy in the lab. Coming from Barrett, it was high praise indeed. As August approached, Lucy received an invitation that would force her and Sarah to make their most difficult decision yet. The California Institute of Technology wanted Lucy to join a special summer program for exceptional young minds, with the possibility of a custom educational track that could accelerate her through high school and undergraduate studies in as little as 5 years. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime," Dr. Mitchell said when he presented the offer. "Caltech is one of the finest institutions in the world for the kind of work Lucy does." Sarah's expression remained guarded. "It's also 3,000 miles away." "There are housing options for family members," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Caltech understands that Lucy's age makes this an unusual situation." That night, after Lucy had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by brochures, letters, and offers that had arrived over the past months. Elite private schools promising accelerated curricula, research institutions offering resources beyond anything available in public education, technology companies dangling internships that adults would envy, a world of opportunities, and all of them threatened to pull her daughter further from the normal childhood Sarah had tried so desperately to preserve. She was still sitting there when Lucy padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair tousled from restless sleep. "Can't sleep either?" Sarah asked, managing a smile. Lucy shook her head, climbing onto a chair across from her mother. Her eyes scanned the papers on the table. "You're worried about all these offers." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. "I'm trying to figure out what's best for you." Caltech, the Archer Foundation program, even that special school in New York, and they all want to help you develop your gifts. But I don't want you to miss out on just being a kid." Lucy was quiet for a long moment, tracing patterns on the table with her finger. "Mom, do you remember what Grandpa used to say about his inventions?" Sarah smiled. "He said a lot of things about his inventions. He said that the best ones weren't the ones that made people say, wow, they were the ones that helped people. Who needed helping?" Lucy looked up, her young face serious in the dim kitchen light. "I don't want to be famous or special. I just want to help." Sarah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "What are you saying, sweetheart?" "I don't want to go to California," Lucy said firmly, "or New York. I want to stay here with you. I like working at the Institute sometimes, but—" She hesitated. "When we helped fix the hospital power, that felt important. More important than making new engines for rich companies." Sarah felt a complicated mixture of relief and surprise. "You don't want to accept any of these offers?" "Not exactly." Lucy slid off her chair and retrieved her notebook from her backpack by the door. She opened it to a page filled with sketches of what looked like modular buildings. "I've been thinking about something else." The design showed small, portable structures equipped with solar panels, simple tools, and workspaces. "These could go anywhere," Lucy explained. "Places where kids don't have fancy schools or computers. They could be labs or workshops, or whatever kids need to learn by making things." Sarah studied the drawings, recognition dawning. Mobile. Learning spaces. Lucy nodded eagerly. "They wouldn't cost much. We could use recycled materials for a lot of it, and kids could learn by building real things that help their communities." Her eyes shone with excitement. "That's what I want to work on, Mom, not just making better machines, but helping other kids learn how to make things too." Sarah stared at her daughter, seeing William Reynolds in the passionate gleam of her eyes. He had always believed that true innovation came from unexpected places, from people who saw problems through fresh eyes, unclouded by convention. "Have you shown this to Dr. Mitchell or Mr. Archer?" she asked. Lucy shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to show you first." Sarah took a deep breath, suddenly seeing a path forward. What if we propose this as an alternative? Instead of you going to these specialized programs, what if we asked the Archer Foundation to help develop your mobile learning spaces? "Do you think they would?" Lucy asked, hope blooming on her face. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But it's worth asking. And if they say no—" She gathered the brochures and offers into a neat pile, then deliberately set them aside. "Then we'll find another way. Together." Lucy's smile illuminated the dim kitchen. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. Her daughter was extraordinary, yes, but also still very much a child, with a child's wisdom and clarity of purpose. As Lucy returned to bed, Sarah remained at the table, her mind racing with possibilities. The path ahead wouldn't be simple. There would be disappointment from those who had other plans for Lucy's gifts, skepticism about the value of her alternative vision, practical challenges in making it reality. But as she finally rose to seek her own rest, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since Lucy's talents had first been discovered. Hope that her daughter might find a way to be both exceptional and whole, to change the world without losing herself in the process. Marcus Archer leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he studied the design spread across his desk. Across from him, Lucy sat with perfect posture, her eyes steady despite the nervousness she felt presenting her idea to one of the most powerful men in the technology world. Sarah stood behind her daughter, a supportive hand resting on Lucy's shoulder. "Mobile learning pods," Archer mused, lifting one of Lucy's detailed sketches, "designed to be deployed in underserved communities, built from recycled and sustainable materials, powered by solar energy." He set the paper down, his expression unreadable. "And you want the Archer Foundation to fund this instead of your education?" "At Caltech," Lucy nodded. "Yes, sir. I believe these could help thousands of kids, not just me." "It's an admirable concept," Archer acknowledged, "but also a dramatic pivot from the trajectory we'd envisioned for you. Your work on the Prometheus project showed potential to revolutionize energy technology. These learning pods are, well, they're educational infrastructure. They're more than that, Lucy said, her voice gaining confidence. They're incubators for different kinds of thinking. She pulled out another sketch, this one showing the interior of a pod where children worked with various materials and tools. In school, we're all taught to think the same way, but some kids, like me, see things differently, and that difference can be valuable if it's given a chance to develop. Archer's eyebrows rose slightly at the maturity of her argument. He turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you support this change in direction?" "I do," Sarah replied firmly. "Lucy has extraordinary gifts, but she's still a child. This project allows her to develop those gifts while doing something meaningful and age-appropriate." Archer nodded slowly, then surprised them both by chuckling. "Do you know why I started the Archer Foundation, Lucy?" She shook her head. "Because when I was 12, I built a radio transmitter that could broadcast across my entire neighborhood. My science teacher told me it was impossible with the parts I had access to." He smiled at the memory. "I proved him wrong, but no one took me seriously because I was just a kid from a poor family. I vowed that when I had the means, I'd create opportunities for young minds who saw possibilities where others saw limitations." He tapped her designs. "Like these pods of yours." Lucy's eyes widened. "Does that mean—" "It means," Archer interrupted, with a slight smile, "that the Foundation will fund a pilot program. 3 pods to start. We'll deploy them in different communities and evaluate their impact." He held up a cautionary finger. "But this doesn't mean abandoning your work at the Institute entirely. Your mind is too valuable to be confined to just one project." "I can do both," Lucy assured him eagerly. "I believe you can," Archer agreed. "In fact, I think your continued work at the Institute will inform the development of these pods. Cross-pollination of ideas is how innovation flourishes." As they left Archer's office, Lucy could barely contain her excitement. 3 pods, she whispered to her mother. "We're really going to build them." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "You're really going to build them," she corrected gently. "This is your vision, Lucy." The following months transformed Lucy's after-school hours into a whirlwind of activity. A dedicated space was established at the Jenkins Institute for the Learning Pod Project, as it came to be called. A small team was assembled, including Alex, who had enthusiastically volunteered to help with the engineering aspects, and a new addition, Maya Donovan, an experienced educator who specialized in alternative learning methodologies. The key, Maya explained during an early planning session, is to create spaces that don't just duplicate traditional classrooms with fancier equipment. These pods need to facilitate a fundamentally different approach to learning. Lucy nodded eagerly. They need to be places where kids can follow their curiosity, not just memorize facts, where they can build things that matter to them and their communities. Maya smiled. Exactly. Learning through doing, through creating solutions to real problems. The first prototype pod took shape throughout the fall. It was a marvel of efficient design, a 400-square-foot structure that could be assembled in less than a week, powered entirely by rooftop solar panels, with rainwater collection systems and composting facilities to minimize its environmental footprint. Inside, instead of rows of desks, there were workbenches, tool stations, and a central collaborative space where children could gather to share ideas. Dr. Mitchell, who had initially been disappointed by Lucy's decision to focus on the pods, became an unexpected ally when he saw the technical innovations she was incorporating into the design. "This passive cooling system is remarkable," he commented one afternoon, examining the blueprints. "It could have applications far beyond these learning pods." Lucy beamed at his praise. "It's based on termite mounds. They maintain nearly perfect temperature control without any mechanical systems." This pattern repeated itself throughout the development process. Solutions Lucy created for the pods, from the flexible power storage system to the modular furniture that could be reconfigured for different activities, had potential applications in other fields. The Jenkins Institute began filing patents on her behalf, with a portion of any future revenues earmarked for expanding the Learning Pod project. By December, the first pod was ready for deployment. After careful consideration, Dorchester, a diverse Boston neighborhood with limited educational resources, was selected as the initial site. The installation was scheduled for the week after Christmas, when school was out of session. The morning of December 27th dawned clear and cold. Lucy, bundled in her warmest coat, arrived at the site, an unused corner of a community center property, to find a small crowd already gathered. Neighbors, curious about the unusual structure being delivered on flatbed trucks, had come to investigate. "Is it some kind of fancy storage shed?" one woman asked skeptically. "It's a place for kids to learn by making things," Lucy explained, her breath visible in the winter air. The woman looked doubtful. "We've had programs come and go before. They never last. This one will be different," Lucy promised with a certainty beyond her years. Throughout the day, Lucy worked alongside the installation team, helping to assemble the pod's components. Despite her small stature, she insisted on participating in every aspect of the process, from securing the foundation to installing the solar panels. By sunset, the exterior was complete, a sleek, modern structure that somehow managed to look both futuristic and welcoming. The interior would take another 2 days to finish. Lucy and Maya worked together to arrange the learning stations, stock supplies, and calibrate the environmental systems. When they finally powered up the pod for the first time, Lucy felt a surge of pride as the lights came on, powered entirely by the energy they had captured from the winter sun. "It works," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Maya smiled. "Did you doubt it would?" "No," Lucy admitted, "but seeing it is different from imagining it." The pod's official opening was scheduled for New Year's Day, a symbolic fresh start for the community. Lucy spent the intervening days nervously refining details, worrying about everything from the durability of the workbenches to whether local children would actually want to use the space. Sarah watched her daughter's anxiety with understanding. "It's always scary when a dream becomes real," she told Lucy. "Suddenly it can succeed or fail. It's not just perfect in your imagination anymore." "What if nobody comes?" Lucy asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Then we'll learn from that and try something different," Sarah replied simply. "That's what innovation is about, right? Not being afraid to try and not being afraid to adapt." New Year's Day arrived with unexpected warmth, a January thaw that brought temperatures into the 50s. Lucy and Sarah arrived at the pod early to make final preparations. Marcus, Archer, would be attending, along with several Jenkins Institute representatives and local community leaders. But Lucy was most concerned about the neighborhood children. Would they come? And more importantly, would they connect with her vision? By 10 o'clock, a substantial crowd had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Marcus Archer gave a brief speech, emphasizing that the pod belonged to the community and would evolve based on their needs and feedback. Then, to Lucy's surprise, he invited her to say a few words. Nervous but determined, she stepped forward. "This pod isn't really about fancy technology," she began, her voice small but clear. "It's about giving kids space to think differently and solve problems their own way. Inside, you won't find tests or textbooks. You'll find tools and materials and freedom to explore." She paused, looking at the curious faces of the children in the crowd. "I hope you'll make things that help your neighborhood, and that you'll teach us what you learn, because different kinds of minds see different kinds of solutions." There was a moment of silence, then applause, led, Lucy noticed with a flush of pleasure, by the skeptical woman from the installation day, who now nodded with cautious approval. After the ribbon cutting, children and adults streamed into the pod to explore. Lucy had worried the space might feel crowded, but her careful design created a sense of openness despite the limited square footage. She moved through the pod, explaining features and demonstrating tools, her initial nervousness fading as she saw the growing excitement on young faces. One boy, about 9 years old with serious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, approached Lucy as she adjusted the settings on a 3D printer. Did you really design this whole place? He asked doubtfully. I had help, Lucy admitted. A lot of people worked together to make it real. But it was your idea. She nodded. He considered this, then asked, "Can I design something too? Something big like this?" "That's exactly why we built it," Lucy told him. "So kids like you can design whatever you can imagine." The boy's face brightened. "I have ideas for a water filter. Our tap water tastes funny sometimes." Lucy felt a flutter of excitement. This was precisely what she had hoped for, children identifying problems in their own community and feeling empowered to address them. "Show me," she said, leading him to a workbench. Throughout that first day, similar connections formed. A group of girls became fascinated with the solar energy system, peppering Alex with questions about how it worked and whether they could build smaller versions for their homes. Two brothers spent hours at the electronics station, dismantling an old radio and reassembling it with modifications of their own design. By evening, when the open house concluded, over 40 children had signed up for regular pod sessions. Maya, who would be overseeing the pod's daily operations, couldn't contain her enthusiasm. "This is going to work, Lucy," she said, as they shut down the systems for the night. "These kids are hungry for this kind of learning environment." Marcus Archer, who had observed the day's activities with keen interest, approached Lucy as she was preparing to leave. "Congratulations," he said simply. "You've created something special here." Lucy shook her head. "It's only the beginning. We need to see if it actually helps kids learn and create." Archer smiled at her practicality. Always the engineer, focused on results. "I admire that." He glanced around the empty pod, now quiet after the day's excitement. "But don't underestimate what you've already accomplished. You had a vision that many adults would have dismissed as impractical, and you've made it reality. That itself is a valuable lesson for the children who will use this space." As winter gave way to spring, the Dorchester pod flourished beyond even Lucy's optimistic projections. Regular sessions filled quickly, with waiting lists forming for specialized workshops. The community embraced the pod, with parents volunteering time and local businesses donating materials. Most importantly, the children who attended began developing their own projects, from simple robots that helped elderly neighbors with household tasks to a rainwater purification system that addressed the water quality concerns that had motivated the boy with wire-rimmed glasses, Jason, who had become one of the pod's most dedicated participants. The second and third pods were deployed in March, one in a rural community in western Massachusetts where educational resources were limited by geography, and another in an immigrant-heavy neighborhood in South Boston. Each developed its own character, reflecting the needs and interests of its community. Lucy divided her time between the pods, the institute, and school, a balancing act that sometimes left her exhausted but never unfulfilled. She was particularly moved by the rural pod, where children who had previously been isolated by distance were forming collaborative relationships, sharing skills and insights across miles that had once seemed insurmountable. As the project's success became evident, the Archer Foundation approved funding for 5 additional pods, with deployments planned throughout New England. What had begun as an alternative to Lucy's accelerated education had become a movement in its own right, attracting attention from educators and community developers across the country. Yet, despite the growing recognition, Lucy remained fundamentally unchanged, still preferring her notebook to spotlight, still finding her greatest joy in the quiet moments of creation. What had changed was her sense of purpose, now clearer and more defined than ever before. One warm evening in late May, as Lucy and Sarah walked home from the Dorchester pod, Sarah noticed her daughter's unusually contemplative expression. "Penny." "For your thoughts?" she asked. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was thinking about something Jason said today. He was helping a younger kid with a project, and when they got it working, he told her, 'See? You just had to look at it differently.' And she was so proud." She looked up at her mother. "That's what these pods are really about, isn't it? Not just making things, but learning to see differently." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "Yes, sweetheart. and teaching others to value those different ways of seeing. She squeezed Lucy's hand. Your grandfather would be so proud of what you're building. I think he would, Lucy agreed softly. But it's not finished yet. There's still so much more to do. As they turned onto their street, the setting sun cast long shadows before them. Shadows. That seemed to Lucy like pathways stretching into a future filled with possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. By the time Lucy turned 12, the Learning Pod project had expanded to 15 locations across New England. Each pod had developed its own unique character, reflecting the needs and interests of its community, but all shared the same fundamental philosophy: learning through creation, problem-solving through collaboration, and valuing different ways of thinking. The project's success had brought Lucy a level of recognition that sometimes made her uncomfortable. A feature in National Geographic's education issue led to invitations to speak at conferences, requests for interviews, and even an offer to develop a television series focused on young innovators. Sarah helped her navigate these opportunities, accepting those that aligned with their values and politely declining the rest. We're not interested in turning Lucy into a brand, she told one particularly persistent television producer. She's a child with a vision, not a commodity. Despite the attention, Lucy maintained her routine of dividing time between school, the Jenkins Institute, and the learning pods. Her academic performance remained strong, though several teachers noted that she seemed most engaged when classroom activities involved practical applications of knowledge. Lucy is brilliant, her science teacher told Sarah during a parent-teacher conference, but traditional education doesn't always serve minds like hers. She needs to see the purpose behind what she's learning. This observation reinforced Sarah's conviction that the path they had chosen, declining the accelerated programs in favor of Lucy's own project, had been the right one. The learning pods weren't just helping other children, they were providing Lucy herself with a meaningful context for her extraordinary abilities. At the Jenkins Institute, Lucy continued her involvement with the Prometheus project, which had moved into the commercial development phase. Her organic systems approach had become a cornerstone of the Institute's work, influencing projects beyond energy technology. Even Barrett, once her most vocal critic, had grudgingly incorporated her methodologies into his own research. Reynolds has an intuitive grasp of system dynamics that can't be taught, he admitted to Dr. Mitchell during a project review. It's irritating but undeniable. Dr. Mitchell had smiled. High praise coming from you, Thomas. But as summer approached, new challenges emerged. The rapid expansion of the Learning Pod project had created logistical complexities that strained their resources. Maintaining consistent quality across multiple locations, training facilitators who understood the project's philosophy, and securing sustainable funding beyond the Archer Foundation's initial investment all required attention. We're victims of our own success, Meyer observed during a strategy meeting in early June. Communities are requesting pods faster than we can deploy them, and some of our existing locations need upgrades already. Lucy, who had been studying reports from the various pods, looked up. The South Boston pod is developing some really innovative water filtration systems, and the one in Worcester has those amazing urban gardening projects. She tapped her notebook thoughtfully. What if we connected them? Not just electronically, but physically, having kids from different pods collaborate on bigger projects? This suggestion led to the Summer Innovation Exchange, a 6-week program where participants from different pods would work together on community-based challenges. The initiative required careful planning and raised new questions about transportation, supervision, and project scope, but Lucy was convinced it would strengthen the overall network. As preparations for the exchange program intensified, Lucy found herself increasingly drawn to the administrative aspects of the project. She began attending budget meetings, participating in facilitator training sessions, and helping develop evaluation metrics to measure the pod's impact. You're turning into quite the organization builder, Marcus Archer remarked when he visited the Jenkins Institute in late June. Not just an inventor, but a systems architect. Lucy considered this characterization. I think they're connected, she replied. Building organizations is like engineering. You're designing something where All the parts work together toward a purpose. Archer nodded approvingly. Exactly right. And like any complex system, organizations need constant adjustment and maintenance. He lowered his voice slightly. Which brings me to something I wanted to discuss with you and your mother. There's interest in expanding the Learning Pod project nationally. Lucy's eyes widened. Nationally? You mean in other states? Initially in 5 cities: Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, Seattle, and Phoenix. The Archer Foundation would provide seed funding. But we'd need local partners in each location. He studied her reaction. It would mean a significant scaling of operations, and likely more public attention. The prospect was both exhilarating and daunting. Lucy excused herself to find Sarah, who was helping organize supplies for the summer innovation exchange in another part of the building. When Lucy explained Archer's proposal, Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "That's a major expansion," she said carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of growth?" "I don't know," Lucy admitted, "but there are kids everywhere who need spaces like our pods, who think differently and don't fit in traditional schools." She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a habit when she was thinking intensely. "But it would mean more management, more travel maybe, less time actually working with the kids or on technical projects." Sarah nodded, understanding the dilemma. It's the challenge every successful initiative faces eventually: how to grow without losing the essence of what made it special in the first place. They agreed to consider Archer's proposal carefully before responding. In the meantime, the Summer Innovation Exchange began, bringing together participants from all 15 New England pods for collaborative projects. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. A team of children from 3 different pods developed a mobile air quality monitoring system that could be attached to bicycles, creating a neighborhood-level pollution map far more detailed than municipal sensors provided. Another group designed a distributed computing network using recycled smartphones to provide free processing power for community organizations. A third created a series of instructional videos in multiple languages to help recent immigrants navigate local resources. "This is exactly what I hoped would happen," Lucy told Alex as they observed the air quality team fine-tuning their sensors. "They're building things that actually help their communities." Alex nodded, equally impressed. "And they're doing it by combining different perspectives. The technical kids, the artistic kids, the ones who understand social systems, they're all contributing." The exchange culminated in a community showcase where project teams presented their work to an audience of parents, neighbors, community leaders, and media representatives. The event attracted unexpected attention when Senator Elizabeth Warren made an unannounced visit, spending over an hour talking with the young innovators about their projects. "These children aren't just learning skills," the senator told reporters. Afterward, "they're learning citizenship, how to identify problems in their communities and take initiative to solve them. That's education in its highest form." The senator's praise brought a new wave of interest in the Learning Pod project, including inquiries from the Department of Education about potential partnerships. Lucy found the attention flattering, but also distracting from the work itself. She was more interested in the tangible outcomes, like the air quality monitoring system being adopted by an environmental justice organization, or the instructional videos being distributed through community health centers. As August heat settled over Boston, Lucy and Sarah finally met with Marcus Archer to discuss the national expansion proposal. They had spent weeks considering the opportunity, consulting with Maya, Dr. Mitchell, and facilitators from the existing pods. "We've thought a lot about this," Lucy began, her posture straight despite her nervousness, "and we have some conditions for the expansion." Archer raised an eyebrow but gestured for her to continue. "First, each new pod needs to be genuinely community-led, not just dropped in from outside. Local people need to be involved in planning and running them," Lucy explained. "Second, we need to develop a training program for facilitators that preserves our core philosophy. And third," she glanced at her mother for support. "Third," Sarah continued, "Lucy's public role needs to remain limited. She'll consult on the technical aspects and overall vision, but we don't want her becoming the face of a national campaign." She's still a child who deserves some privacy and normalcy. Archer considered these conditions carefully. The first two are not only acceptable, but essential for sustainability. The third, he paused, seeming to choose his words with care. I understand your concerns, but Lucy's story is powerful. It demonstrates what these pods are all about, recognizing and nurturing different kinds of intelligence. Her involvement gives the project credibility. I don't mind sharing my story, Lucy clarified. I just don't want to spend all my time giving speeches or doing interviews instead of actual work. After further discussion, they reached a compromise. Lucy would participate in key events and limited media engagements, but would not undertake a full publicity tour. Her primary focus would remain on developing the technical and educational aspects of the pods. With this agreement in place, planning for the national expansion began in earnest. Lucy worked with a team to create standardized designs that could be adapted to different climates and settings. Maya developed a comprehensive training curriculum for facilitators. Sarah coordinated with community organizations in the target cities to build local partnerships. The work was exhilarating but exhausting. As her 13th birthday approached in September, Lucy found herself stretched thinner than ever before. School had resumed, bringing new academic challenges. The Jenkins Institute continued to value her input on technical projects. And now, the Learning Pod project was demanding more of her time and energy. One evening, as she sat at her desk struggling to focus on homework after a long strategy session for the Chicago pod, Lucy felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She pushed aside her textbook and pulled out her personal notebook, not the one she used for technical designs, but a journal where she recorded her private thoughts and feelings. Sometimes I feel like I'm being pulled in too many directions, she wrote. Everyone wants something from me, ideas, solutions, decisions. I love the pods and the work at the Institute, but I miss just having time to think, to explore ideas that might not be useful right away. Is this what growing up means? Having less time to wonder and more responsibility? Sarah, passing by Lucy's open door, noticed her daughter's troubled expression. Everything okay? She asked, pausing in the doorway. Lucy closed her journal quickly. Just tired. Sarah entered the room, sitting on the edge of the bed. It's more than that, I think. After a moment's hesitation, Lucy admitted, I feel like I'm always rushing from one thing to the next. School, the Institute, pod meetings, planning sessions for the expansion. There's no time to just be. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. I've been worried about that. You've taken on an enormous amount of responsibility for someone your age. She reached out to brush a strand of hair from Lucy's face. Maybe it's time to reevaluate some commitments. But everything is important, Lucy protested. The pods are helping so many kids, and the Institute work matters too. Yes, they are, but you matter more. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. You've created something remarkable, Lucy, but you don't have to carry all of it on your shoulders. That's what organizations and teams are for, to share the burden. This conversation sparked a period of reflection for both Lucy and Sarah. Over the next few weeks, they worked to recalibrate Lucy's involvement in the various projects. Maya took on more leadership in the day-to-day operations of the Learning Pod project. At the Jenkins Institute, Lucy reduced her hours, but focused them on the technical work she found most engaging. And at school they arranged a more flexible schedule that accommodated her unique circumstances while ensuring she maintained connections with peers. As these adjustments took effect, Lucy began to rediscover the joy of unstructured exploration that had characterized her early fascination with engineering. She set aside one day each week for what she called wandering work, pursuing questions and ideas with no immediate practical application, simply following her curiosity. It was during one of these wandering sessions in early October that Lucy began sketching a concept that would eventually become her most significant innovation yet. An adaptive interface system that could learn from and respond to different cognitive styles. What if technology could adapt to how people think, instead of forcing people to adapt to technology, she mused to Alex during a rare quiet afternoon at the Institute. The pods are physical spaces that accommodate different learning approaches, but what about digital spaces? Alex, who had been coding a monitoring system for the pod network, looked up with interest. "You mean like personalized user interfaces?" "More fundamental than that," Lucy explained, warming to the concept. "An AI system that could recognize whether someone thinks linearly or associatively, visually or verbally, and then adapt its entire interaction model to match. It would be like having a translator between different thinking languages." This seed of an idea took root during a challenging period for the Learning Pod project. As the national expansion progressed, tensions emerged between standardization, necessary for scaling efficiently, and the local adaptability that was central to the pod's philosophy. Lucy found herself frequently mediating between these competing imperatives. During one particularly difficult video conference with the Chicago implementation team, Lucy observed how the participants seemed to be talking past each other, not because they disagreed on goals, but because they processed information differently. The technical team presented data and specifications, while the community representatives responded with stories and contextual concerns. Neither group was fully comprehending the other's perspective. "We need translators," Lucy realized, not just between human languages, but between different modes of thinking. This insight reconnected her to the original inspiration behind the learning pods, creating spaces that valued cognitive diversity. As the fall progressed, Lucy gradually shifted some of her focus from the physical pods to this new frontier of adaptive interfaces. Dr. Mitchell, recognizing the potential of her concept, allocated institute resources to support its development. By November, a small team was working on a prototype application that could analyze interaction patterns and adjust its communication approach accordingly. The system was crude but promising, capable of detecting whether a user preferred visual or textual information, step-by-step instructions, or conceptual overviews. "This could transform how we teach in the pods," Maya observed when Lucy demonstrated an early version. "Imagine if our digital tools could meet each child where they are cognitively, just as our facilitators try to do in person." The Adaptive Interface project reignited Lucy's technical passion just as the demands of the pod expansion had begun to dampen it. She found herself excited to get to the institute each afternoon, eager to refine algorithms and test new approaches. This renewed enthusiasm spilled over into her other responsibilities, bringing fresh energy to her contributions to the pod network. As the year drew to a close, the Learning Pod project reached a significant milestone, the official opening of the first pod outside New England, in Chicago's South Side. Lucy and Sarah traveled to attend the ceremony, where they were greeted by a community that had embraced the pod concept and made it their own. The Chicago pod featured innovations that reflected local needs and resources. A rooftop garden designed to extend the growing season using passive heating, a fabrication space specializing in adaptive devices for people with disabilities, and a multilingual digital library of community knowledge. During the opening celebration, a local girl named Tasha, just 10 years old with bright eyes and determined expression, approached Lucy. "I heard you invented these pods when you were my age," she said. Lucy smiled. "I had the idea, but lots of people helped make it happen." Tasha nodded seriously. "I have ideas too, for helping my grandma who can't walk so good anymore. Can I show you my designs?" As Lucy sat with Tasha, reviewing sketches of a clever mobility device that could navigate the girls' apartment building's narrow hallways and unreliable elevator, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was why she had created the pods, not for recognition or accolades, but for moments like this, when a child realized that her ideas mattered, that her different way of seeing the world was valuable. Later, as they flew back to Boston, Sarah noticed her daughter's contented expression. "Good trip?" Lucy nodded. "I met this girl, Tasha. She reminded me of me, I guess, seeing problems and thinking of solutions." She gazed out the airplane window at the clouds below. "There are so many kids like that out there, Mom. Kids who see things differently. And now they have places where that difference is celebrated," Sarah said softly. Lucy turned from the window, her expression suddenly serious. But it's not enough. The pods help, but they're just the beginning. There's so much more to do, to change how the world values different kinds of minds. Sarah recognized the determined look in her daughter's eyes, the same look that had launched the Learning Pod project and was now driving the adaptive interface work. It was the look of someone who saw not just what was, but what could be. One step at a time, she reminded Lucy gently. You've already started something important. Let it grow. Lucy nodded, returning her gaze to the clouds. But her mind was already racing ahead, envisioning new possibilities, new connections, new ways to bridge the gaps between different ways of thinking. The learning pods had been her first major innovation, but she knew with certainty that they would not be her last. The winter that Lucy turned 14 brought unprecedented challenges to Boston. A series of powerful storms battered the Northeast, causing widespread power outages and infrastructure failures across the region. As temperatures plummeted, the situation quickly became dangerous, particularly in underserved communities where heating systems depended on electrical supply. Lucy was at the South Boston pod when the first major outage hit. She had been working with a group of children on improvements to their water filtration system when the lights flickered and died, plunging the space into the dim gray light of a snow-laden afternoon. "Everyone stay calm," Maya called out, already, reaching for the emergency supplies. The backup system should kick in shortly, but the minutes ticked by and the pod's solar-powered backup failed to activate. Outside, snow continued to fall in thick, swirling sheets, accumulating on the solar panels faster than the automated cleaning system could clear it. Lucy moved quickly to the control panel, accessing the system diagnostics through her tablet, which still had battery power. "The panels are completely covered," she reported, "and the battery reserve is showing errors, possibly damage from the cold." As they worked to restore power to the pod, reports began coming in of similar failures across the city. The storm had exceeded all predictions in its intensity, overwhelming emergency response systems. Hospitals were operating on generators, many of which were already showing signs of strain. Community centers designated as emergency warming shelters were without heat. The situation was rapidly becoming critical. "We need to get these kids home while transportation is still running," Maya decided, already sending notifications to parents. But Lucy's mind was racing in a different direction. "Wait," she said, studying the data on her tablet. "This isn't just our pod. The entire grid is destabilizing in sections." She looked up, her expression intense. "The Jenkins Institute has emergency power capabilities, and they might understand what's happening with the grid." A flurry of phone calls followed. Sarah, who had been at work at the hospital, managed to reach the pod through increasingly unreliable cell service. The decision was made. Maya would ensure all children were safely collected by their families, while Lucy would make her way to the institute with Alex, who had been helping at the pod that day. The journey through Boston's snow-choked streets was arduous. Public transportation had largely shut down, and they were forced to walk much of the way buffeted by wind and stinging snow. By the time they reached the institute, Lucy's fingers and toes were numb despite her winter gear. They found the facility in emergency mode. Dr. Mitchell was coordinating with city officials, trying to understand the cascading failures affecting the power grid. The Prometheus technology, which had been implemented in several key infrastructure nodes around Boston, was showing erratic behavior under the extreme conditions. "Lucy, thank God," Dr. Mitchell said when he spotted her. "We're facing a critical situation. The new hybrid systems are going into protective shutdown, but that's causing surges elsewhere in the grid. It's a cascade effect we didn't anticipate." Lucy shed her outer layers quickly, moving to join the engineers clustered around displays showing real-time grid data. She scanned the patterns, recognizing immediately what was happening. "The systems are responding exactly as designed," she said, pointing to fluctuating energy levels. "They're protecting themselves from damage, but they're not communicating with each other, so each protective measure is creating new problems downstream." Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. "We need a coordinated response, but the central management system is overwhelmed by conflicting data." Lucy studied the displays, her mind making connections with characteristic speed. "This reminds me of something we're seeing in the Adaptive Interface project," she said. "When different cognitive styles interact without translation, they create confusion rather than collaboration." She grabbed a tablet and began sketching rapidly, developing a makeshift protocol that would allow the various nodes to share their status and coordinate their responses rather than acting in isolation. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it might prevent the worst of the cascade failures until a more permanent fix could be implemented. As engineers implemented her protocol, Lucy's attention was drawn to another crisis developing. Reports were coming in from Boston Medical Center, where Sarah worked, of critical systems failing as backup generators struggled with the prolonged outage and extreme cold. The hospital's power management system is based on an older version of the Prometheus technology, Dr. Chen explained, her face tight with worry. It wasn't designed for conditions this extreme or outages this prolonged. Lucy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Her mother was there, along with hundreds of patients who depended on reliable power for survival. Without hesitation, she turned to Dr. Mitchell. "I need to go to the hospital," she said firmly. "I understand that system. I helped modify it." After the power issue last year, Dr. Mitchell looked torn. "Lucy, it's dangerous out there, and you're 14. And I'm the one who best understands how those systems interact," she interrupted. "You know I'm right." After a tense discussion, a compromise was reached. Lucy would go to the hospital, but not alone. Alex volunteered immediately, as did Jason, the boy from the Dorchester pod, now 13 and a skilled technician in his own right, who had been at the Institute for a workshop when the storm hit. Transportation was arranged through emergency services, who were prioritizing movement of essential personnel. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Mitchell pulled Lucy aside. "You understand that this is not just about technical expertise," he said quietly. "People's lives depend on these systems." Lucy nodded solemnly. "I know. That's why I have to go." The journey to Boston Medical Center was tense and slow through the storm-ravaged streets. When they finally arrived, they found the hospital in a state of controlled chaos. Staff were moving vulnerable patients to areas with more reliable power, using flashlights where emergency lighting had failed, and manually operating equipment that normally ran on electricity. Lucy spotted her mother immediately, directing a team moving equipment from one ward to another. Sarah's face registered shock, then concern, then understanding, as Lucy explained why they had come. "The main generator room is in the basement," Sarah told them, leading the way through dimly lit corridors. "Engineering staff are down there now, but they're struggling to understand why the backup systems keep destabilizing." In the cavernous generator room, the hospital's engineering team was working frantically to maintain power to critical areas. The lead engineer, a woman named Diane Carter with decades of experience, looked up in surprise when Sarah introduced Lucy and her companions. "These are children," she said flatly. "This is Lucy Reynolds," Sarah replied. "She helped design modifications to this very system last year, and she's just come from the Jenkins Institute where they're dealing with similar failures across the grid." Carter's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. "We're losing ground," she admitted. "The system stabilizes for a few minutes, then goes haywire again. We've got maybe an hour of reliable power left to critical care areas." Lucy moved immediately to the control interfaces, with Jason and Alex close behind. The hospital's system was more isolated than the main grid, designed to function independently during emergencies, but it still interfaced with external power when available, and that connection was part of the problem now. "It's trying to synchronize with grid power that isn't stable," Lucy explained, studying the diagnostics. "Each time it attempts to draw from the grid, it encounters fluctuations that trigger protective shutdowns." "Can't we just disconnect entirely from the grid?" Carter asked. "Not without a full restart of the generators," Jason pointed out, having quickly grasped the system architecture. "And you can't risk that with critical systems running." Lucy was already working on a solution, her fingers flying across the interface. "We need to create a buffer," she said. a virtual isolation layer that shields our system from grid fluctuations while still allowing for supplemental power when it's stable. As they worked to implement this approach, Lucy became aware of Alex watching her with a strange expression. "What?" she asked, momentarily pausing. "Nothing," he said. "It's just, you're so calm. People's lives are at stake, and you're problem-solving. Like it's just another day at the lab." Lucy considered this. "It's not that I don't understand what's at stake," she said softly. "It's that understanding it too much would make it harder to think clearly. And clear thinking is what people need right now." Their solution, a hybrid of Lucy's buffering approach and Jason's insights about system prioritization, took nearly 2 hours to fully implement. During that time, hospital staff performed minor miracles, manually ventilating patients when machines faltered and performing procedures by the light of headlamps. When the modified system finally stabilized, providing reliable power to critical areas, the relief in the generator room was palpable. Carter, who had worked alongside them despite her initial skepticism, shook Lucy's hand with genuine respect. "I've been doing this job for 30 years, she said, "and I've never seen anyone of any age process complex systems so intuitively. Thank you." The crisis at the hospital was far from over. The storm continued to rage and the broader grid issues remained, but the immediate danger had passed. As Lucy, Jason, and Alex made their way back to the hospital cafeteria, where emergency staff were gathering between shifts, the exhaustion of the day finally caught up with them. Sarah found them there, huddled around cups of lukewarm cocoa, provided by cafeteria staff working with limited resources. She embraced Lucy tightly, then included Jason and Alex in her gratitude. "What you did today mattered," she told them, her voice thick with emotion. "Really mattered." Lucy leaned against her mother, suddenly feeling very much her age despite the adult responsibilities she had just shouldered. "I was scared," she admitted quietly, "not of the technical problems, but of what would happen if we couldn't solve them in time." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "That's the weight that comes with the kind of work you do. When your solutions affect people's lives, the stakes are higher than any test or competition." The next few days brought both challenges and unexpected opportunities. The storm eventually passed, but its effects lingered throughout the region. Schools remained closed, infrastructure repairs continued around the clock, and communities pulled together to support those most vulnerable to the cold and power disruptions. What emerged from the crisis, however, was a new awareness of both the fragility and the resilience of interconnected systems, both technological and human. The learning pods, with their emphasis on practical problem-solving and community engagement, became natural hubs for neighborhood response efforts. Children who had been developing skills in the pods now applied them to real-world challenges. Building simple heating devices for elderly neighbors, creating communication systems that didn't rely on vulnerable infrastructure, organizing distribution of essential supplies. At the Jenkins Institute, Lucy's makeshift protocol for grid coordination was being refined into a more comprehensive approach that could prevent similar cascading failures in future emergencies. Dr. Mitchell had assembled a task force, including representatives from utility companies, emergency services, and community organizations to develop a more resilient grid architecture. "What became clear during this crisis," he explained during a briefing that Lucy attended, "is that our systems, both technical and organizational, aren't designed to accommodate extreme stress. They're optimized for efficiency under normal conditions, not resilience under extraordinary ones." Lucy, listening intently, found herself thinking about the learning pods and the children who use them. The pods had been created to accommodate different ways of thinking, to value cognitive diversity rather than forcing conformity. Perhaps the same principle could apply to infrastructure design. "What if," she suggested during a break in the briefing, "we designed systems that expected and valued difference? Not just multiple redundancies, but fundamentally different approaches working in parallel." This concept, cognitive diversity applied to infrastructure resilience, became the foundation for what would eventually be called the Resilient Systems Initiative. Over the following months, Lucy worked with teams at both the Institute and the learning pods to develop models for infrastructure that could adapt to changing conditions, learn from disruptions, and incorporate multiple problem-solving approaches. The winter crisis also led to a personal evolution for Lucy. The experience at the hospital had shown her the real-world impact of her work in a way that abstract research never could. She began to see her role not just as a technical innovator, but as a bridge between different domains: technology and human needs, institutional knowledge and community wisdom, specialized expertise and practical application. This perspective informed her approach to the expanding Learning Pod network, which continued to grow nationally despite the challenges posed by the severe winter. By spring, pods were operational in all 5 target cities, each adapting the core model to local conditions and needs. In Chicago, the pod developed a focus on urban agriculture, with systems for year-round growing that helped address food insecurity in the surrounding neighborhood. In Atlanta, pod participants created a network of micro-libraries, combining physical books with digital resources accessible through simple, durable devices they designed themselves. The Denver pod specialized in environmental monitoring, with participants developing low-cost sensors that tracked air and water quality across the city. What connected these diverse initiatives was not just the physical design of the pods or the technology they contained, but the underlying philosophy that Lucy had articulated from the beginning: valuing different ways of seeing and thinking, connecting technical innovation to community needs, and empowering young people to create solutions rather than just consume knowledge. As her 14th year drew to a close, Lucy found herself at another crossroads. The Learning Pod project was now an established national initiative with secure funding and capable leadership. The adaptive interface work at the Jenkins Institute was progressing well, with promising applications in educational technology, medical systems, and emergency response. Her contributions to grid resilience following the winter crisis had earned recognition from industry leaders and policymakers. Yet despite these successes, or perhaps because of them, Lucy felt a restlessness, a sense that something important remained unrealized. She had created spaces where different kinds of thinking were valued, tools that could adapt to cognitive diversity, systems that could withstand stress through flexibility rather than rigidity. But these remained isolated innovations, islands, of change in a world still largely designed for and by conventional thinkers. One warm evening in late May, Lucy sat with Sarah on the small balcony of their apartment, watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in shades of gold and pink. They had been discussing Lucy's schedule for the summer, balancing commitments to the Institute, visits to pods in other cities, and time for normal teenage activities. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in 2 different worlds," Lucy said, voicing a thought that had been growing for months. "There's the world of the pods and the projects, where different kinds of thinking are celebrated. And then there's the rest of the world, where the systems are still designed as if everyone's mind worked the same way." Sarah nodded, understanding. Building alternatives is important, but eventually, the alternatives need to influence the mainstream. "Exactly," Lucy agreed, leaning forward. "The pods help hundreds of kids now. The adaptive interfaces might eventually help thousands. But what about the millions of people whose minds work differently, who struggle with systems that weren't designed for them?" Sarah studied her daughter's earnest face, recognizing the familiar signs of Lucy's mind racing toward a new horizon. "What are you thinking?" Lucy's eyes were bright with possibility. "I'm thinking it's time to go bigger, not just creating safe spaces for different kinds of thinking, but changing how we design everything, from education to healthcare to city planning, to value cognitive diversity from the start." As the last light faded from the sky, Lucy outlined a vision that would eventually become her most ambitious project yet: the Cognitive Diversity Initiative, a systematic effort to transform how institutions and systems approached human difference. It would begin with research documenting the practical benefits of inclusive design, then develop frameworks and tools that organizations could use to implement change, and finally advocate for policy shifts that would embed these principles in public systems. Sarah listened, asking thoughtful questions but not discouraging the scope of Lucy's ambition. She had long since learned not to underestimate what her daughter could accomplish. When she set her mind to a problem she cared about, "It won't be easy," she cautioned as the stars began to appear above them. "You'll be challenging fundamental assumptions about how things should work. That kind of change doesn't happen quickly." "I know," Lucy acknowledged, "but it has to start somewhere. And we already have evidence that it works. From the pods, from the adaptive interfaces, from the grid resilience project." She paused, then added quietly, "Grandpa used to say that the most important innovations aren't the flashiest ones. They're the ones that change how people see what's possible." Sarah smiled, hearing her father's wisdom echoed in her daughter's voice. He did say that, and he was right. She reached over to squeeze Lucy's hand. "So where do you start?" Lucy gazed at the city spread before them, her mind already mapping connections and possibilities. "With the networks we've already built, the pod communities, the institute researchers, the people who saw what happened during the winter crisis." Her voice grew stronger with conviction. "We start by bringing together all the different ways of seeing and thinking and showing what becomes possible when they work together instead of against each other." As night settled fully over Boston, Lucy Reynolds, still a teenager, yet already an innovator whose work had touched thousands of lives, looked to the stars and imagined a world where different minds were not just accommodated but celebrated. A world where systems were designed for diversity rather than uniformity, where the unique patterns of thought that had once marked her as odd might instead be recognized as valuable. It was a vision born from her own experience of difference, nurtured by her mother's unwavering support, and inspired by her grandfather's legacy of purposeful innovation. And though she couldn't yet see the full path to making it reality, she knew with certainty that the journey would be worth whatever challenges lay ahead. 3 years had passed since the winter crisis that transformed Lucy's understanding of her work's real-world impact. Now 17, she stood at the podium in the Jenkins Institute's main auditorium, surveying the diverse audience gathered for the first National Summit on Cognitive Diversity. Representatives from education, healthcare, technology, government, and community organizations filled the seats, all drawn by the growing recognition that traditional approaches to system design were failing to serve significant portions of the population. "Thank you all for coming," Lucy began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Public speaking still didn't come naturally to her, but she'd learned to manage her nervousness when the message mattered enough. 6 years ago, I was just a kid who saw things differently, sometimes too differently to be understood. Today, we're here to talk about building a world where being different isn't a disadvantage, but a source of strength." The summit represented the culmination of 3 years of intensive work on the Cognitive Diversity Initiative. What had begun as Lucy's ambitious vision on that starlit evening with her mother had evolved into a structured movement with research, implementation, and advocacy branches. The research team, led by Dr. Chen from the Jenkins Institute, had documented the concrete benefits of cognitive diversity and problem-solving across multiple domains. Their landmark study, published in Science the previous year, demonstrated that teams incorporating different cognitive styles consistently outperformed homogeneous groups on complex challenges, not just occasionally, but reliably and significantly. The MIUM implementation branch, with Maya Donovan playing a key role, had developed frameworks and tools to help organizations recognize and leverage cognitive diversity in their own contexts. From school districts to tech companies to healthcare systems, early adopters were reporting promising results, more innovative solutions, better user experiences, and reduced barriers for traditionally underserved populations. The advocacy work, which Lucy herself led alongside a coalition of partners, focused on policy changes that would embed cognitive diversity principles in public systems. This had proven the most challenging aspect, requiring not just evidence and tools, but a fundamental shift in how institutions conceptualized human difference. As Lucy continued her opening remarks, she caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Sarah sat in the front row, pride evident in her expression. Beside her was Dr. Mitchell, now semi-retired but still an active advisor to the initiative. Jason, who had grown from the serious 9-year-old with wire-rimmed glasses into a brilliant young engineer specializing in assistive technology, sat with a contingent from the learning pods, now numbering over 60 locations nationwide. Marcus Archer was there, too, his support for the initiative unwavering, despite initial skepticism about its broad ambitions. Even Thomas Barrett had come, his earlier antagonism toward Lucy long since replaced by grudging respect, and eventually genuine collaboration on resilient system design. "The evidence is clear," Lucy continued, gesturing to the data displayed behind her. "When we design systems, whether technological, educational, or organizational, to accommodate different ways of thinking, everyone benefits. Not just those who think differently, but all of us. Because cognitive diversity isn't a problem to be solved, it's a resource to be cultivated." As she spoke, Lucy reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The years since launching the Cognitive Diversity Initiative had been filled with both triumphs and setbacks, moments of breakthrough and periods of frustration. Learning pods had continued to flourish, evolving from educational spaces into community innovation centers that addressed local challenges while nurturing diverse thinking styles. The adaptive interface technology had matured into a suite of tools used in educational settings, workplace environments, and public services to bridge gaps between different cognitive approaches. But perhaps the most significant developments had come from unexpected quarters, from the children who had grown up in the learning pods and were now entering adulthood with both technical skills and a deep appreciation for cognitive diversity. Jason, who had worked alongside Lucy during the hospital crisis, now led a team developing medical interfaces that could adapt to patients with different information processing styles, ensuring critical health information was accessible regardless of how one's mind worked. Tasha from the Chicago pod, whose mobility device for her grandmother had been just the beginning of her innovation journey, was revolutionizing inclusive design in architecture and urban planning. At just 16, she had already received national recognition for a neighborhood redesign project that made public spaces truly accessible to people with diverse physical and cognitive needs. Dozens of other pod graduates were pursuing similar paths, bringing cognitive diversity principles into fields ranging from environmental science to social services to entertainment. They formed a growing network of practitioners who saw human difference not as a deviation from some imagined norm, but as a natural and valuable aspect of human experience. As Lucy concluded her opening remarks and introduced the first panel of speakers, she felt a familiar mix of satisfaction and impatience, pride in what had been accomplished, urgency about the work still to be done. The summit's first day unfolded with presentations showcasing research findings, implementation, case studies, and policy frameworks. The second day was structured around working sessions where participants from different sectors collaborated on applying cognitive diversity principles to specific challenges. It was during one of these sessions, focused on emergency response systems, that an unexpected situation arose. A representative from the Federal Emergency Management Agency approached Lucy during a break, his expression urgent. "Ms. Reynolds, we have a developing situation that might benefit from your expertise," he said, introducing himself as Director Robert Callahan. "There's a critical infrastructure failure affecting multiple systems in the Seattle area. Given your work on grid resilience after the Boston winter crisis, we believe your perspective could be valuable." Lucy was led to a makeshift command center that had been established in a conference room adjacent to the summit. There, a team was monitoring the situation in Seattle, where an unusual combination of technical failures and extreme weather was creating cascading problems across power, water, and transportation systems. "The systems are operating in conflict," explained the lead engineer, pointing to data streams on multiple screens. "Each is following its own protocols, but the interactions between them are creating compound failures." Lucy studied the information, recognizing patterns similar to what she had seen during the Boston crisis, but with additional layers of complexity. "This isn't just about technical systems acting in isolation," she observed. It's about different approaches to problem-solving conflicting with each other. She turned to Director Callahan. I'd like to bring in some additional perspectives, if that's acceptable. When he nodded, Lucy sent messages to several summit attendees with relevant expertise, Jason for his knowledge of adaptive interfaces, Maya for her understanding of collaborative problem-solving, and a civil engineer from Seattle who understood the local infrastructure intimately. As they assembled, Lucy explained her approach. Instead of trying to force these systems into a single coordinated response, we need to create conditions where their different approaches can complement rather than conflict with each other. It's cognitive diversity applied to infrastructure. Over the next several hours, the impromptu team developed a novel response strategy. Rather than implementing a top-down control system, they designed a flexible framework that allowed each infrastructure component to share information about its status and needs, while maintaining its own problem-solving approach. It's like creating a translation layer between different languages, Jason explained to Director Callahan. Each system continues to operate according to its own logic, but they can now understand and adapt to each other's behaviors. By evening, the Seattle situation had stabilized. The intervention hadn't solved all the problems. Physical repairs and system upgrades would still be necessary, but it had prevented the catastrophic failures that had seemed imminent. As the emergency team dispersed, Director Callahan approached Lucy. "That was remarkable work," he said, "and frankly, unlike any approach I've seen in 20 years of emergency management. Would you be willing to consult with FEMA on implementing these principles more broadly?" Lucy considered the request, then replied thoughtfully, "I'd be happy to help develop frameworks and training, but the real power of this approach isn't in having one expert. It's in bringing together multiple perspectives, technical, organizational, community-based, and creating systems that can leverage all of them." The Seattle incident, though not planned as part of the summit, became a powerful real-world demonstration of the cognitive diversity principles being discussed in the formal sessions. When Lucy shared the experience during the closing plenary, the next day, it resonated deeply with attendees who had been grappling with similar challenges in their own domains. "What we witnessed yesterday wasn't just an effective emergency response," she told the audience. "It was a proof of concept for everything we've been discussing at this summit. Different ways of thinking, working together rather than against each other, created solutions none of us could have developed alone." As the summit concluded, participants departed with not just theoretical frameworks, but practical tools and real-world examples of cognitive diversity principles in action. Commitments were made, collaborations formed, and implementation plans developed across sectors and regions. Sarah found Lucy after the final session as attendees mingled during a farewell reception. "You've started something important here," she said, embracing her daughter. "Something that will continue growing long after this summit ends." Lucy nodded, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. "It's strange to think about how it all started, with a little girl who saw an inverted component in an engine design." "It started before that," Sarah corrected gently, "with a family that valued your different way of seeing the world, and a grandfather who taught you that real innovation serves real needs." As they spoke, Marcus Archer approached, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man Lucy didn't recognize. "Lucy, I'd like you to meet Senator Michael Richardson," Archer said. "He chairs the Senate Committee on Infrastructure and Technology, and he's been following your work with great interest." The senator shook Lucy's hand warmly. "Ms. Reynolds, I've been impressed by what I've seen at this summit. Your approach to system design has significant implications for national infrastructure planning." He paused, then continued with evident sincerity. "I'd like to discuss the possibility of incorporating cognitive diversity principles into upcoming legislation." This unexpected development led to a series of meetings in Washington over the following months. Lucy, initially hesitant about engaging with the political system, found that her practical, evidence-based approach resonated with lawmakers across the political spectrum. The concept of designing systems to accommodate different ways of thinking appealed to both those who valued inclusion and those focused on effectiveness and resilience. By the end of the year, elements of the Cognitive Diversity Initiative's framework had been incorporated into federal guidelines for infrastructure, development, educational policy, and public service design. It wasn't a complete transformation. Such changes never happen overnight, but it represented a significant shift in how institutions approached human difference. Throughout this period of policy work, Lucy maintained her connection to the learning pods and the Jenkins Institute. The hands-on innovation continued alongside the broader systemic changes, each informing and strengthening the other. The pods, now established in communities across the country, served as living laboratories where cognitive diversity principles could be tested and refined in real-world settings. As her 18th birthday approached, Lucy faced decisions about her future educational and career path. Universities worldwide had been recruiting her since she was 14, offering unprecedented flexibility and resources. Technology companies dangled opportunities to lead research divisions with virtually unlimited budgets. Government agencies and international organizations sought her expertise for various initiatives, but Lucy, true to form, was considering a different path. On a crisp autumn evening, she sat with Sarah in their favorite spot on the apartment balcony, watching the city lights come alive as darkness fell. "I've been thinking about what's next," Lucy said, her voice thoughtful. "After graduation." Sarah nodded encouragingly. "And what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about creating something new, a center for cognitive diversity research and application, not tied to any single institution or sector, but working across all of them." Lucy's eyes brightened as she elaborated. "A place where people with different thinking styles could collaborate on the most challenging problems we face: climate adaptation, healthcare accessibility, educational equity, not just accommodating cognitive diversity, but actively leveraging it as our greatest resource." Sarah smiled, unsurprised by her daughter's ambitious vision. Where would this center be located? "That's the thing. It wouldn't have a single location. It would be distributed, with hubs in communities around the country, all connected digitally. Like the pods, but focused on broader challenges and bringing together people of all ages." Lucy leaned forward, her excitement palpable. "The technology exists now to make this work, and we have networks of people who understand the value of cognitive diversity, from the pods, from the institute, from the organizations that participated in the summit." As Lucy outlined her concept in more detail, Sarah recognized that her daughter was synthesizing everything she had learned and created over the past 7 years: the physical innovation spaces of the learning pods, the adaptive technology developed at the institute, the collaborative methodologies from the emergency response work, and the policy frameworks from the initiative. "It's ambitious," Sarah acknowledged when Lucy had finished. "But if anyone can make it happen, you can." She studied her daughter's face, noting the confidence and clarity that had replaced the uncertainty of earlier years. "You know, when all this began, I was so worried about protecting your childhood, about not letting your gifts become a burden. But watching you grow into this work, seeing how it fulfills you, I understand now that this is your path. Not one that was forced on you, but one you chose and created." Lucy reached for her mother's hand. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You always believed in me, even when my ideas seemed impossible." "Not impossible," Sarah corrected, with a smile. "Just ahead of their time." In the months that followed, Lucy's vision for the Cognitive Diversity Network began to take shape. The Archer Foundation provided initial funding, with additional support coming from a coalition of partners who had witnessed the impact of her previous initiatives. The Jenkins Institute offered technical resources and research collaboration. And communities that had hosted learning pods volunteered to become the first hubs in the distributed network. The first major project undertaken by the network addressed a challenge that had long concerned Lucy: making healthcare systems more accessible to people with diverse cognitive styles. Teams comprising medical professionals, patients, technologists, and community members worked collaboratively to redesign everything from hospital signage to medication instructions to provider communication protocols. The results were dramatic. Pilot implementations in Boston, Chicago, and Seattle demonstrated significant improvements in patient outcomes, particularly for individuals who had previously struggled to navigate healthcare systems. The adaptations designed for cognitive accessibility proved beneficial for all patients, especially during stressful or emergency situations when anyone's cognitive processing might be compromised. This pattern, innovations designed for cognitive diversity benefiting everyone, repeated across the network's projects. Transportation systems redesigned to be navigable by people with different information processing styles became more intuitive for all users. Educational materials developed to accommodate various learning approaches improved comprehension and retention for entire student populations. As Lucy's 18th year drew to a close, she found herself at the center of a growing movement, one that was transforming how human difference was perceived and leveraged across systems and institutions. The quiet girl who had once sat alone at lunch, drawing mechanical designs in her notebook, now led a network of innovators who were reimagining everything from classroom design to city planning. Yet despite these accomplishments, Lucy herself remained remarkably unchanged in essential ways. She still preferred solving problems to seeking recognition, still found her greatest joy in the moment when a new connection or possibility revealed itself. Fame had come unavoidably, but she treated it as an occasionally useful tool rather than a goal in itself. On the eve of her high school graduation, Lucy visited the original Learning Pod in Dorchester, now managed by a former participant who had grown up in the program. Children still gathered there after school, still created projects that addressed community needs, still discovered the value of their unique ways of seeing the world. As Lucy watched them work, a girl of about 10 approached her shyly. "Are you really Lucy Reynolds?" she asked, clutching a notebook covered in detailed drawings. Lucy smiled. "I am. What's your name?" "Zoe," the girl replied. "I'm designing a communication system for my brother. He thinks in patterns and colors, not words, and people don't understand him." She opened her notebook, revealing intricate diagrams of a device that could translate visual thinking into verbal expression and vice versa. Lucy studied the designs with genuine interest. "This is remarkable, Zoe. Have you tested any prototypes yet?" The girl nodded eagerly. "A simple version. It helps sometimes, but it needs to be better." She hesitated, then asked with endearing directness, "Do you think it's possible to make something that really lets different kinds of minds understand each other?" Lucy considered the question carefully. "I think it's not only possible but necessary. The biggest challenges we face aren't just technical problems, they're communication problems between different ways of thinking." She gently tapped Zoe's notebook. "And solutions like yours are how we begin to bridge those gaps." Later, as Lucy walked home through the Boston evening, she reflected on that conversation. From the first Learning Pod to the Global Cognitive Diversity Network, from the winter crisis response to the Healthcare Accessibility Project, her work had always centered on the same fundamental insight, that human difference was not a deficiency to be overcome but a resource to be cultivated. The world was far from fully embracing this perspective. Institutions still defaulted to standardization, systems still privileged certain cognitive styles over others, individuals still faced barriers based on how their minds processed information. But change was happening, gradually in some areas, rapidly in others, and the momentum was building. As she reached the apartment building where she had grown up, Lucy paused to look up at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. Her grandfather had once told her that the most important innovations weren't the flashiest ones, but those that changed how people saw what was possible. In her own quiet way, through persistence and clarity of vision, rather than force or fame, Lucy Reynolds had done exactly that. She had taken her own experience of thinking differently and transformed it into a movement that was reshaping systems and institutions, creating spaces where diverse minds could contribute their unique perspectives to solving humanity's most pressing challenges. And she had done it not by seeking to stand above others, but by bringing people together, recognizing that true innovation emerges not from solitary genius, but from the rich intersection of different ways of seeing, thinking, and being in the world. As the stars brightened overhead, Lucy smiled at the immensity of what remained to be done. The journey ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, unexpected obstacles, moments of doubt and difficulty. But it would also bring the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of meaningful contribution.